So my name is Jonathan Jacobs. I'm a director with TBH, and together with Ali Dibaj, we're going to be presenting a presentation on our maturity methodology and the tool that we use and that we've developed over time to help assess and measure maturity. So there's all of our gump about us. We've got a bit of experience. We've done this before. So to give you a bit of an outline about the topic. So as I'm sure you all know, projects are all about delivering an agreed scope to a specified level of quality over a specific time and within a certain budget. So as I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted here, the key to successful delivery of a project is to have a good project controls in place. So, and then key to having good project controls is to be consistently and continuously developing people, have robust processes for individual project control disciplines, and to have integrated technology to help bring that all together and to provide one source of truth. So, how do you know where you're at? Obviously, if your project's going well, you're getting good results. But how do you tweak those? How do you make it? How do you improve? How do you know where to start? Obviously, if your project's going poorly, it might be a bit more obvious, and you can easily identify things. But then, which elements do you start with first? So, what we've done over time, and using a variety of sources like PMBOK and Prince2 and a variety of other sources, we've put together a tool and a process and a methodology for objectively assessing an organisation or a project's level of maturity. And then what we do is part of the process is we identify a current state, so where you're at this point in time. Then we work with you to agree where you want to be. So what's your future state look like? Work out, then perform a gap analysis with some recommendations about how we're going to get there, and formulate that into a plan for delivery. So that's our roadmap. So project controls, are we getting better? So as I'm sure all of you are, you're all in the Australian environment. We're getting more and more projects, more and more complex projects, large programs of work and portfolios with multiple interdependencies. Timescales are tighter, margins are lower. There's greater risk, and people are taking on a lot more risk, and there's a lot more unknowns that people are taking on, or organisations are taking on, in order to deliver projects. So what's changed? So this is what's needed. So better, smarter people, more capable people with better skills and experience, better ways of working, and quicker and more efficient tools. So to start with the people challenges, because everything basically comes down into people, process, and technology. So when we talk about people, so it's, do they have the correct competency levels? So do they have the right skills, the training, the experience, and often linked to competency is capacity. So, do they have enough bandwidth to actually do the jobs that they need to do? Then it's all about development of those people. So, that's professional development. Are they accredited? How do we get them accredited? Are they adding value to the organisation? So are they proactive? Are they just reporting on what's been, what's gone on in the past, or are they being proactive in helping a project manager or a project director or the project progress in the right fashion? And then siloed. So often we'll find that there'll be individuals at certain levels of the organisation that have a very high maturity level, and they're delivering to a very high level, but you'll find that that's scattered, and that doesn't always translate across the rest of the organisation. So regardless if you have somebody who's a superstar if everybody else is not at that level, it doesn't really make any difference. Then we have the process challenges. Now, key to this is consistency. It's the old saying, measuring apples with apples. You need to have a consistent approach to what you're doing so that everybody knows the steps that you're going through. So how do you achieve that? So you've got to have some frameworks in place. So those frameworks need to set the rules about how you're going to do things in the business. And then what are those frameworks based on? Best practice. Now, importantly with best practice is you want to get value for money. So I prefer to say good practice. So what's fit for purpose for your organization? And then all of those need to be integrated. So they all need to be talking to each other so that if one thing pops out at this point, you need to know how that relates to it for all the other elements of your project. So the next point is system challenges or technology. So what tools do you have available? Do you want to go out and purchase something new, or what have you got in place, and are we able to just use those more efficiently? And then once again, the integration piece comes into that. So are all your tools linked together? So do they all talk do they all talk together? Are they all connected? Do they, if I'm looking at a risk, can I correlate that risk with a cost item, with a schedule item? And how is that reported? And then once again, coming back down into the cost. So do I, a project manager, and I'm sure maybe this same project manager may have said something similar to you guys, is don't give me a Ferrari when I just need a Ute. And I think I might have said this to a few of you before, but never a truer statement has been made. So don't go out and spend a fortune and get minimal value out of it when you can spend a reasonable amount of money to get the right value out of it. So the solution really is tying all of these pieces together. So it's the process, the people, the systems, and integrating those all together, and then using the systems as your single source of truth. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you on to my beautiful assistant, Ali.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay. So I'm going to start with setting some ground rules before we get to the methodology. So that's the part we talk about. So Jonathan set the rules for what are the challenges and what challenges we are facing. So this is the basically the ground rules for the assessment. So how do you measure on the unmeasurable? How many categories of things or indicators of characteristics do we have? So basically we do have two types of characteristics or indicators. Tangible, like the total number of schedules with cost integration. That's something that you can count. And then you have the intangible, like employee performance on a 5-point scale. Now, although most of us put numerical figures against both types of characteristics, most of you would agree with me that any quantification of employee performance is far more subjective than the total number of schedules with cost. So how do we measure the intangible ones when we are measuring it against the tangible ones? So we can do it by associating intangible characteristics to tangible ones. We can make those intangible ones, countable. Now that we get to this point, big name. How many of you have heard the name Audrion? It's named after George Stanley Audrion, academic and a scholar in management. Big name, very simple law. The law states that if you want to change things, if things won't change, things that do not change will remain the same. Right? Simple. Or as a consequence, if you want things to be better, you probably need to change something. Now, the key message in this sentence is the change. That takes us to the next big name dropping, the haystack syndrome. Have you heard about the haystack syndrome? Someone's heard. Okay, great. That's good. So I'm going to first explain very broadly what the haystack syndrome says. And it's interesting that this comes right after the previous presentation about data. So the haystack syndrome states that unlike what we are diagnosing, we're drowning in an ocean of data. So we have more than enough data, but we seldom have sufficient information. How is that? Do you agree with that? What's the difference between data and information? So you have all the data, but you don't have the information. The difference is data, or data, is any answer, but information is the answer. Now, most of the information systems that I've came across are just immense data systems. They tend to collect, store lots of information, and produce mammoth stacks of reports, which, no offense, they're worthless. Because they fail to answer the question. That's the problem. Now that we've set the rules what the haystack syndrome is, how do we solve the problem? So there is a methodology called the constraints theory. I don't know if you've heard about it. That's something that answers to the haystack syndrome with a very simple question that we probably won't have the answer to it anyway. It's this: what to change? I'm pretty sure most people think that they already know the answer. Just ask within your organization. Ask them what to change. You will never get an answer that I don't know. Everybody knows what to change, what needs to be changed. Ask a cab driver. They know what needs to be changed in the government. They know how to fix things. Everybody knows what needs to be changed, but why don't we do the address it? Why can't we fix it? It's because we don't know what to change. We naively think we know what to change. That is the fundamental question. You cannot fix a problem if you don't know what to change. The other problem is, there is a misconception that local optima will conclude into global optima, which is completely false. You can have efficient circles of intimate groups of people working efficiently and have a completely inefficient system because you have local optima. You haven't addressed the bigger issue. And the issue does not lay within the process. It's way deeper than that. It is in the modes of operation. So the problem lays within the modes of operation rather than the process itself. We get to the process, but that's where the problem lies. So you need to identify the constraints. What is causing you the problem? Not talking to some scheduler. By all means, you can fix it over there, or some cost controller, or someone in the contract, and they'll always complain about each other. And they say, if this guy on the other side of the road, the floor, fixes what he does, all the problems will be solved. Guess what? It won't. Now, if we fix this first question, that takes us to the second big question. To what to change to? And what does this mean? Okay, now we know what to change, but how much do we need to change it? We were working in one of the organizations that we did this maturity assessment for them. And we were talking about the different levels of cost management maturity. And one of the directors came back and said, hey, we're not NASA. We don't need that. We need to be here. We don't want to be here. So that's a very, very reasonable approach. Because if you aim for big, you probably wouldn't solve your problem anyway, because probably you need to improve it a little bit. So that's to what to change to. You need to understand what you want to change, to what level. So that's the process improvements. Third one is how to change, which is the simplest one between the first two. Because if you know what to change and you know where you want to get, probably you would somehow figure out how to get there. I mean, it can be shorter or it can be longer. Now, I want to ask you another question. How many of you agree with the following statement? people hate change, or people resist change, or something similar. People don't like change, and if you want to change something in the organization, you have to crush the resistance and hit hard and then make them change. That's how change works. How many of you agree with that? How many do you think people hate change? Okay, before jumping into conclusion, let me ask you this. If someone were to hand you $50 million and say, I'm going to give you $50 million, no strings attached. You have $50 million to walk away. Doesn't that change every aspect of your life? Doesn't this change everything about your life? The way you live, where you live, what you do. So how come, if that's the case and people hate change so much, why everybody is enrolling in all these lottery schemes and buying lottery tickets? People love change. It's not that people hate change, it's people assess change and think if it makes their life more comfortable or it has any benefit to them, then they will get along with you or resist the change. It's not that people just blindly hate change. That is not true. And this is why there is no way that you can succeed in changing if you don't get the consensus of people working in an organization. There is no way that you can change with an iron fist. This is the way it is. Don't like it, get out. This doesn't work. And we learned it the hard way. We tried so hard, and then because a group of people within an organization, a very large one, didn't like what we did, it ended up very bitter because they thought that there's no value in it. And we learned the lesson that you need to get your stakeholders along with you in the journey. So that's why this methodology has a part which is the collaborative approach. You need to have the people on the other side. There are many of these big consultancies that give you over-the-shelf prescriptions, and then they have plenty of reports, I'm pretty sure, and they can give you anecdotal recommendations of, yes, to have a good cost management, you have to have a robust cost management. But what does that mean? Okay, now I'm going to get to the objectives of the IPC assessment. This is our objectives that we define, that what do we need to get out of the maturity assessment toolkit. The first one is we want to understand what the business is. And this is very deep. It's not just understanding, yes, this company is into power supply, or this company is an asset management company. It's understanding deeply what the our organization does, what are the modes of operation, how they interact with each other, how do they work, what is the cost management tools, what is the time management tool, how do they approach risk, and all of that. So that's the understanding the business, which I'm going to explain in the next slide, which is the methodology. The next objective is to measure the current performance. Remember when I said intangible and tangible? So when measuring performance, we do have some tangible indicators, like we can count the number of schedules with baselines, or how many of the project managers are following a cost management or using a cost management tool. But there are plenty of intangible ones, which we need to associate with tangible metrics, which I'm going to explain in the methodology slide. Third one is we need to check it against industry best practices. And this is the most important part, because predominantly what we have in the industry is two types of recommendations, which are not necessarily best practice. So things like the PM book, or mostly any publication by the PMI, or Prince 2, they're mostly guidelines, not best practices, because they don't tell you how to do stuff. But whereas best practices published by AACE, for example, are a methodology that tells you it's a prescription of how to do stuff. It's got the flow charts, how to get from point A to point Z. And that's where we do check against those industry best practices, depending on the understanding of the business and where they want to be. So you cannot use a best practice that is best for a big capital project for a company that does asset management. So they have 2 or 3 days of small to large item jobs. You can't use that on the other one. And the last one is to develop tailored and focused actions. And this is where you get the recommendation on what and how to get there. This is not some again, off the shelf. It's specific to the organization and how they do things. And last, but the most important one, is the stakeholder engagement and consensus. But remember, change is not always bad. It's only bad if people hate it, if people think they've been heard. Do you know there is an interesting thing that it was back when I was in the US. There was a line that you could ring up, and the person who was picking up the line had no skills or any license to give you any advice. They would just listen to you, and then you say goodbye, and they hang up. And then all of a sudden, you feel better. Why? You just talk to an empty phone because somebody just said, hello, yes, I hear you, yep, okay, yes, okay, yeah, bye. And then all of a sudden you felt better. You know why? Because you felt you've been heard. That's the reason. And if the people in an organization feel that they haven't been heard and nobody's listening to them, there's no way you can succeed. Okay. Now this is the methodology part, and that's the interesting part. The methodology starts with the evaluation starts with the diagnosis. The diagnosis is a series of interviews, workshops, assessment of all the policies, processes, procedures, checking their tools. We have people having hands-on experience, so we assign people within the organization to mimic or simulate what an employee doing the same job goes through. So we ask the employer to give us access to the time management tool or to the cost management tool, and ask one of our consultants to sit down and do the job. Not just ask them how they do the job. They do a forecast for a project. They start importing a project out, exporting projects out or importing in. They prepare reports, helping the reporting team prepare a report. This is the only way you can get the feeling of how they feel when they work it, right? The second one is scoring, which is the most important part. And this is where we associate those intangible metrics or measures to the tangible items. And the tangible items are based around, we do have a scoring system which goes from 1 to 5, and for each element of fundamentals of project control, we do have somewhere between 27 to 37 best practices around each one of those elements, and we do score them. The scoring does not happen only from us, so we give the scoring sheets to the client, to the organization, and ask them to score themselves. So what's best in that? I'm not scoring. You score yourself. I mean, we give it to the different teams, scheduling team, cost team, risk team, all the teams, and ask them to score themselves. And then we get back the scores and then compare it with each other. In most cases, because it's very, very unambiguous, and it's a very binary kind of scoring system, it comes back exactly the same. If it's not, we do have meetings with them, and then we somehow land on a score. Third is the gap analysis. The gap analysis comes from the to what to change to. It's where the organization wants to be. Now we know what the current state is. The gap analysis is the gap between the current state and the future state. And remember, the future state already has the scoring system. So if they say they want to be a 4 out of 5, we already know in each element of time management what capabilities they need to develop. It's not that it's anecdotal. We do have the methodology for each one of those steps of how to get there. Last one is the scope and objective. So what is the scope? Depending on how big the change is, the scope can vary. So it can be small changes, it can be large changes. If it's big changes, you need to have a bigger scope. And that's where the scope and objectives come from. And last one is how to get there. That's the project plan. It depends on how fast they want to get there. There is so much we can do. You can't rush it, but this is the last step of the methodology. Now, this is an example that we did for a very large organization. Unfortunately, I cannot reveal their name, but I can share the scores with you. So this is the scoring system. So we have 10 for this particular client. We have 10 pillars for the project management. You can see on the left-hand side, there's the as is, so that's where the score was, and the to be state is what they identified where they want to be. And immediately you can see they haven't identified one single thing that they want to be a 5, because they knew that 5 is too much for them and it's not necessary. And there's some that even, there's the third one, which is cost management, they thought that a 3 is enough for them. Now, we do have the metrics behind them, so you would know that the cost management is broken down into 30 elements, and each element has its own steps to get there. So the average score was 3, but you could rely on the other sheet and see exactly where cost management needs to be. And that's the spider chart, so it shows you the as-is inside, and then you have the outer layer, which shows you where you want to be. And that's your roadmap. Not your roadmap, but that's your goal. That's the ultimate goal. We do have then the best practice mapping. So to get to that score, because later on we'll hand over the tool or at least the report to the organization or the client, and they'll do their own quarterly scoring to see how they're traveling. And to do that, we need to do best practice mapping. So for each one of the elements, we need to map it against some of the best practices in the industry. So first one is cost management. This is around all the cost planning, WCS, CBS alignments, budget management, value management, all of that. Time management, again, you're all experts. It's around all the time management, baseline management, getting everything right into your schedule. Does it score? Does it have IPT? Does it cover the entire scope and so on? And the risk management, which is planning your risk, quantitative, qualitative risk analysis, and then the report management, which is probably the most important interestingly enough, it's the most important of all 3, because that's where the information is spitted out. And that's coming back to my point of the haystack syndrome, because you would have reports, and in this particular organization, they used to produce a monthly report that was like 300 pages long. And that was the executive management report. I don't know what the project manager gets, probably War and Peace, but they get something. I mean, if the executives get 300 pages of report, guess what the project manager gets? I mean, poor guy, they'll get probably, yeah. And their first complaint was, our execs don't look at our reports. I said, yeah, that's too bad. I mean, they're not into it, probably. But yeah, we changed the reporting management into smarter dashboards and live reporting, and we scrapped off probably 99% of the reports because nobody cared. There was 1% that remained, and everybody was looking at it. And that's the difference between data and information. And I think the problem is that there was so much emphasis put on the importance of data, where everybody has data. Just think of your organization. Probably you have tons and oceans of data at your hand, but you cannot use that data because you don't know, because it's difficult to produce meaningful information. This is the end-to-end roadmap that we put together for that client. So it starts with Q1, which is the maturity assessment itself, all of the diagnosis and so on. We do have the scope development. We did it with, again, a collaborative approach with the client. Third step is the process analysis deep dive. This was particularly for this client because they wanted us to develop a cost management tool for them. So we had to add another step, which is the deep dive. So we had to go through the nitty-gritty of the way the data is being handled between the different tools in their application system. So they had a large financial system that they used to manually get the data and put it back into a time management tool. And they wanted to have something in between that does the forecasting and cost management for them. So this step came out of that. So it came out of scope development. They realized one of their constraints is their lack of having a proper cost management tool that helps the project managers for a consistent approach and the way they do their forecasting. And that's the implementation plan. So that's when the implementation plan came out of how to do the implementation. This is the interim wins and the easy wins coming out. That was when the actual IPC was implemented throughout the organization. There was some organizational change required because they had a scheduling team, but they didn't have a cost team. The scheduling team were not allowed to touch costs. Project managers used to handle the costs. They didn't want to do it. Nobody wanted to have the costs, so that was the problem. So we had to do a bit of change in the organizational structure, and that's when IPC 1.0 came out. And this was when they had a time frame. They had a framework for the integrated project controls. There were 3 time frames out for time management, cost management, and risk management, all tailored to their needs. There was a protocol for the reporting out. We changed the reporting from Excel and manual data handling to smart dashboards being imported directly without any data handling from the tools. And also we added another cost management tool in between to help them with the forecasting. Now, the important part of understanding whether or not the constraints that you've identified were correct in the beginning is to do another assessment and see if some of your tangible metrics has changed. So we put in place some health checks for them. I mean, when you say health check, you immediately think of medical stuff, but it was just checking if the forecasts are accurate enough and how much they have the time management or the schedules following up a particular process and finishing the jobs on time. And then there was a significant improvement in the cost management section, I can tell you, because some of the forecasts by the project managers were off by more than 100%, but that was reduced to, in being the topmost was 20%, and we had reduced inaccuracy in the forecasting by 70%. And that takes me to the end of the slide.
So that's really our process and about our tool. The next time we're up here, we're hoping to have one of our clients that we've taken through the whole journey.
Yep.
So same time, same place next year, perhaps. We'll have a different show. But we do have a few minutes, or I don't know, about
2 minutes.
2 minutes, 3 minutes for some quick questions. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer those. Sure.
To what extent do you use WIC? And do you consider the structured industry institutes project management?
To be honest, we've probably used more of a PMBOK,
AAC,
AAC,
the UK project management.
UK, yeah, so no. Those are the key forces.
But it's in development phase, so it is great to know these type of feedbacks. In reality, it started with some of our clients giving us what they need, and then we had to change it. So it now considers asset management side of project management, but then again, it is in development phase. So the more we get information, the more we can link it and associate it with the best practices.
I mean, Ali's right. So it just happened by accident. So we were asked to come in and have a look, and we had a look and we thought, hang on, let's put some more sort of robust rules around this so that we can start using it. And we found that it was actually very successful, and since then we've delivered it across a number of organisations, and every time we tweak it and add bits to it. And so any of that sort of feedback is certainly useful. So thank you.
Ali, just on your maturity roadmap, where you showed you have a 7 quarter of implementation period, and assume each quarter was 3 months.
Yes.
So if you're going to do the same process again, how are you going to improve and shorten the whole duration?
That's the thing that I said. So it depends on, this organization was particularly large, and they had big momentum change things. It wasn't particularly us saying it would take 7 quarters to do it. It was them saying that for us to get approvals to change stuff, get an approval for the new tool, for the new cost management, it'll take us. So most of the time in between is not us doing the actual efforts of the change. It was them getting the approvals and funds and budgets and going up the ladder and coming back down. So that was for a very large organization with lots and lots of offices in New South Wales. So that was the problem. We had to visit all those, and they had to change every single one of those offices, roll out new tools, change the organizational chart, merge teams, split some teams. So that's why it took a long time, and it was lots of resistance around getting the signature to changing. They had a bunch of stone-aged frameworks and procedures in place, and they didn't want to change it because obviously you keep your heritage. But then we had to.
We're not mentioning any names.
Yeah. So with saying all of that, now I can't ever reveal the name. But yeah.
The key thing is like one of the things that I've learned is that one of the main stumbling blocks is IT. Okay, so you think it's all going to be fine. You think it's okay just to link into some system, but it's not.
Exactly.
Okay? People are quite protective over their data, and when you start filling at the back end, it becomes problematic. Okay, and that takes a long time to get across the line. The other one is people. You can easily do a framework. You can easily just put a tool in front of them, but the other part is actually training people up and getting them to use it properly and follow the process, so you can get a consistent approach to doing things, so you can get a consistent outcome that you can measure across a business, across multiple different fronts. So those two things are really the tricky parts, and those are the things that take time.
I'm a local government, but my interest is more in asset management because we have a number of assets that we operate and sometimes lease out. But part of what we have to do is renew and maintain a number of buildings in council. But the problem we have is the data. Whilst I understand that, you may have too much data, and actually there's ways to analyze them so that it will result to meaningful information. What I find the starting point is the collection of data. So there will always be an existing register already. It's out of date, and what I meant by that is this condition of the buildings, to just give it a bit more context. So that is the problem. How do we know that the data, because we engage consultants to do the inspection and auditing and all that of our buildings, how do we know that the data is being collected properly and that information is consistent? And so there's a bit of that. So is that included in your
Yes, absolutely.
system
So
then?
that's the thing. So that's understanding what the constraint is. There is a certain industry that does reverse engineering all the time. So there is a big thing. So you know that there's people doing reverse engineering of everything and then making the product by just having the end product and just reversing it. Now you can do how to collect your data by starting from your first question. The information answers the question. So you have to know your questions. What do you want answer for? So when you know what you want to answer for, you go backwards, and then you know what type of information you need to answer those questions. When you know that information, so you have a hypothesis. What we did for this client, we created a mock-up report for them without any information on it. It was just pure graphics, just answering what type of questions the project executives wanted to see. And then by going backwards, we started identifying whether or not that data exists, right? And then we had to create so many other, it turned out that some of the data is already in there, but there are some data they don't have. And then we had to create registers for the data to be included in those registers. So the only way you can answer what type of data you need is to reverse it. You have to know what you need to answer for to be able to create a hypothetical report that answers all of your questions, and then start mapping those reports or the informations to data points. And then when you know the data points identified, then you can see whether or not you have it, or if you don't have it, you have to create it.
But there's nothing like an exec report that goes out and you've got a sea of blood on your dashboard.
Yes.
And you don't know why. So you want to be able to go back and say, hopefully that's an error in the data, and you go back and you fix where that data is coming from. And usually it's a way that the data is coming in is not in a consistent manner. So you need to have a standard about how that data is collected. The other way is just straightforward audits. You do spot checks, health checks, that sort of thing. You go through and you have your own team or an independent going around checking that you're getting the right information. I mean, that's the other way. Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.